Hey guys, I hope your day is going fantastic or your weekend, depending on when you decided to hop on and complete this. I hate that we're having to do class again this way, but life gives you lemons, we make lemonade. This class we just got to keep going. So the goal of this ed puzzle, in this lecture video embedded in this ed puzzle, is to make it seem like it's as normal a class as possible. But at the same time, rather than us having to meet on a Google Meet or whatever at a specific time, you guys can kind of work this out with your schedule with what is best for you. So first off, okay, we will be reading through some sources today. Um, I'm going to post the link right here in the ed puzzle if I remember to do so. Sometimes I would lose my own head if it wasn't attached and I forget to do things. But I did, before this video even started, I did post these sources in your Google Classroom. It says sources for NTI 11824, and it looks like this. Okay, there's a very, very short reading about John D. Rockefeller to get us started. And then there's a couple of readings about the positive impacts of industrialization. So you will need to open that up because we will be referencing that multiple times throughout our time together today. You'll have a journal prompt and discussion about John D. Rockefeller and the principle of self-discipline. A little anecdote about his background, which is really fascinating. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest Americans in all of U.S. history, and he basically came from nothing. And that's what I wanted to show you guys. We will go through the important people in industrial America. So your Rockefeller, your Carnegie, your Henry Ford, your Sears, Frederick Taylor is going to be another one we're going to talk about. All those guys. Reading and questions over primary sources about the positive impacts of industrialization. So you have the Rockefeller reading, and then you will answer these questions right here, okay, over these sources, okay, and I will put the questions in the ed puzzle. Lastly, we will talk about the causes and effects of various strikes during the Gilded Age, and we will talk about what the Gilded Age meant, why this time period in United States history was referenced. This Mark Twain, famous American author, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, all that. He was actually the one that coined this time period, the late 1800s and the early 1900s, as the Gilded Age. So we will break that down. A lot to unpack today. So first, okay, you're just going to answer right in the ed puzzle this question. Just to get you thinking. Okay, you don't have to go into a ton of detail, but kind of warm our brains up, right? It's kind of like you're playing a basketball game. You're not going to hop right in without going through warm-ups and shooting some layups. So this is what we're doing. We're getting our brains working again, okay, and back into class mode. So I want you to think, okay, what does it mean to be self-disciplined? And what is a way that you can show self-discipline in your everyday lives? And why is it important to have self-discipline? I'm going to give you guys a chance to respond to that, but I will say this. The NTI has required some self-discipline out of both students and teachers. But really break this down. It's just a reflection, general thing. What does it mean to be self-disciplined? So go ahead and type that in. Hopefully you had some good reflection there. Again, just trying to get our brains up and running. Now, I want you to read over that reading about Rockefeller. Okay, it's the first 3 pages. Again, it's the first 3 pages of that doc for today. Okay, I'm sorry it's a little bit blurry. It's because I scanned it out of a book, which I think is okay. I mean, hopefully the FBI or whoever doesn't come for me for doing that. But 3 pages for a dual credit history class, I think I'll be okay. But anyway, you will read those and then answer this question. And I want you to look at it. How did Rockefeller exhibit discipline, self-discipline, and patience in this story? So after you read, answer this question. Okay, moving on. Okay, now this was based off the reading that you were supposed to do Tuesday. Okay, so based on your answers here, I'm actually going to know if you actually read this or not. Okay, Fordlandia, okay, was again a wild experiment developed by Henry Ford. Okay, so we went over vertical integration in the lecture video on Tuesday, which that's where you control all parts of a company from the ground up, from the raw materials to the production to the distribution. All of that is in your control. Okay, so Fordlandia the questions that I'm going to ask you are this, okay? Why was Ford land first off, how was Ford Landing an example of vertical integration? Okay, what was the goal there? Why was Fordlandia an ultimate failure, which it was? And then lastly, the last question is about the white man's burden. So the white man's burden is this idea that people who are American or European oriented, whatever, it is their goal and their duty to civilize uncivilized people around the world. So I want you to think about some of the stories that came out of Fordlandia and answer that. How was the white man's burden evident in Ford's and his company's motives with Fordlandia and what they did, their practices? So take a step outside of the economic side of this for a second and look at what they did to their workers. Okay. So answer those questions and we will get on. Okay. Like I said, I'm trying to simulate like this, like it's normal classes can be, but if you complete this ed puzzle, should have led with this, but if you complete this ed puzzle to the best of your ability and really think about your answers, and I can tell you listened and comprehended the readings, you will get 15 points this NTI day, which will make me very, very happy if we have 100% completion. So getting into the important people now, okay? John D. Rockefeller. So obviously you guys are a little familiar with him. Pretty familiar name in American history. You know, you have a lot of places named after him, like the Rockefeller Center, and places like that. But Rockefeller, and obviously you did that reading about him, Rockefeller made his fortune on oil, which you have to think about this. Why was oil in such high demand during the time of industrialization in the United States? The reason oil was in such a demand is obviously you need it for some of your transportation type deals, but also as a lubricant for all these machines that were running in factories all hours of the day. Okay. And John D. Rockefeller, okay, he used horizontal integration, which means we talked about it, horizontal going straight across. He bought out all his competitors and eliminated the competition. And now remember, the idea behind doing that is to gain a monopoly. Okay, we've all played Monopoly, which Monopoly means mono one, only one person is selling a good or product. If you are the only one selling a good or product, what can you do? You can raise the price. Okay, you can raise the price to whatever you want. One of you, for your business model idea, I really liked your way of thinking, which all the business ideas were great, but somebody said, I would rather focus on vertical instead of buying other people out because I would want people to buy my product because it was best, not because I was their only option. I thought that was a very creative thing, but I loved all the ideas. All the ideas were really good and the rationales behind it. The history of the Standard Oil Company. Okay, I'm just introducing this. We're not going to look at it this week. This was a book written by a muckraker known as Ida Tarbell, and she exposed some of the things Rockefeller had done to gain his wealth. You know, that's a whole nother discussion. It's like, was Rockefeller this savvy businessman, or was he a ruthless corporate type that was driving out, you know, the small time refineries? Okay, but we'll get into that more next week. Because a big reason why Rockefeller was able to make a bang for his buck was because of some of these, as he acquired his wealth, he was able to obviously accumulate a little more power. Okay, which hopefully one thing that does not accumulate is a bunch of ice on the roads starting tomorrow as I'm filming this Wednesday. But anyway, Rockefeller had a discount on the shipping, okay, that he was shipping out on railroads, okay, railroad companies. He approached railroad companies and they gave him a discount, a rebate, okay, a refund. Now, his competitors were not getting that same discount on the shipping. So you think, how is that going to allow him to have an edge on his competitors? Well, they're having to pay shipping on oil. He is not. Therefore, what will Rockefeller be able to do with his prices if he doesn't have as much operating expenses? He can lower them by a great margin. And the other people, if they try to, other companies, if they try to lower them, then they might go bankrupt. And that's what Rockefeller did. He put these small oil refineries around Cleveland in a bad spot where he basically went and told them, he's like, okay, I got this deal with the railroads. I'm getting these good prices. You're not. Okay, you're not going to be able to keep up with me. So here's your options. One, you can allow me to buy your company and make it a part of my trust. And, you know, I'll make it worth your while. You'll be comfortable. You'll gain all this money. or you can wait for me to buy you out and take you over. And so that was pretty much Rockefeller's strategy right there. He used that sweet, I call it a sweetheart deal that he had with the railroad company. He used that sweetheart deal to kind of manipulate other companies out of business, because it's like, it's either a this or a that. You can either kind of submit to me and my company and let me take over and you still get a piece of the pie, or you go bankrupt and you get nothing at all. And you're out in the cold and I'll take over your company anyway. So it was a this or that situation. So like I said, he formed the Standard Oil Trust in 1882. The government started to crack down on monopolies. So Rockefeller found an, let's call it an end around. He found a way around this situation. So the competitor stockholders, okay, began to transfer their stocks and their shares in the other company to Rockefeller. So even if Rockefeller was not fully controlling a company, he at least had access to their shares, because the investors were changing gears here. Now, Andrew Carnegie, let's talk about him. So Rockefeller made his fortune in oil. Okay, Carnegie had made his fortune in steel. And Carnegie used a vertical integration business model. So if Carnegie used vertical integration with steel, what do you think that operation would look like? And answer that real quick. So a vertical integration operation with steel meant that Carnegie would buy railroads and have access to iron ore in the mills. And because his production costs are not as high, okay, he's not having to ship it because he's shipping it on his own railroads, and he has the raw materials, the iron necessary to make his steel. He can lower the costs. He can, get a leg up on his competitor. Now, is the startup of this very expensive? Yes, it is. But once you have that network developed, it's going to be very, very hard to compete, because again, you're not having to pay a third party for the iron itself, but you're also not having to pay a railroad company to ship your steel if you own the railroads yourself. Okay. Now, one of the sources you're going to be reading later is called The Gospel of Wealth, and it's Carnegie talking, so you know what his opinion is going to be on some people having a lot of money and others having very little, aka the income gap. He's obviously for that. He's a dude with a lot of money. But he explains how some people having money, he tries to explain how that's not a bad thing. So the Gospel of Wealth, and I'm not going to steal the show from you because you're going to have that reading later, but industrial leaders, it's the idea that industrial leaders were overall helping society because they were helping to industrialize the United States. What arguments do you think they could make here? Like, why is industrialization, more factories popping up? How could that be a good thing for the United States? Kind of hypothesize that for a second. Well, there's another source you're going to read that a big point they brought up is A, it provides jobs for people. Okay. Two, more goods for people. And not only that, because factories are producing at record rates, the price of goods is inevitably going to drop because of the laws of supply and demand. It's kind of like, I always do this example in class. I'm having to rummage through my desk. It's an absolute mess, but everything else is okay. Before industrialization, my factory can only make one mechanical pencil, but now I've industrialized. Okay, I've modernized, whatever you want to call it. I have more machines helping me with this and more workers because I'm, higher profit. Four, that's going to make the price go down. Laws of supply and demand. Okay, I don't have to charge as much as before because I can charge a little bit less. Okay, because maybe my competitor is keeping that in line too. Okay, so their point is helping consumers. It's making goods more accessible to people. Okay, and you'll see that in the reading. The point he makes more in detail. But another thing about the Gospel of Wealth was that rich people, rich dudes, basically, they're getting all this money, and they have a chance to give it back to society. So some people, were like, "Oh, Carnegie and Rockefeller have too much money, and they're taking over." This was their rebuttal to that. They're like, "Hey, I may have a lot of money, but I'm giving it back." Rockefeller donated $500 million. Now, granted, that was a drop in the bucket compared to what he was earning annually, but still, okay, he did give at least a portion of his money back. And then Carnegie, one thing Carnegie is most known for is he gave away a lot of his fortune to libraries and universities, and this was not uncommon. I mean, you look at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. That the money, the endowment for that school was donated by Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was a major titan of industry. He was nicknamed the Commodore, hence why their football and basketball team is called the Commodores even to this day. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. But I want you to think about something. So I forgot to touch on it on an earlier slide, but Carnegie had been raised in poverty in Pennsylvania. His family had initially immigrated from Scotland. Okay. But Carnegie made it a point. He could have donated his money to do anything else, but let's give Carnegie a little bit of credit. Why would he put such a focus on libraries and universities? Okay. And don't just say, oh, he wanted them people to be educated, because there's a deeper thing here. It's that, but go a little deeper with that. The reason Carnegie built libraries around the United States is because he understood what it had been like growing up in poverty, and he wanted his workers, even and normal, like everyday people, working class people, to have an opportunity to educate themselves. Okay, like yeah, he had donated his money to universities too, but libraries was the biggest thing. Thousands and thousands and thousands of libraries across the United States were initially started with funds from Carnegie Steel, right? Andrew Carnegie's company. Okay. Now speaking of that, okay, Carnegie Steel. So J.P. Morgan, many of you guys have probably heard of him before. I do a little research, mini research project with this in my other classes, and it always causes a dilemma when we get to J.P. Morgan because all kinds of insurance and banking stuff pops up on Google. But the guy, J.P. Morgan, okay, one of the wealthiest people. So yes, Rockefeller and Carnegie made the stuff, made the money. He was the banker. Banker's always everybody's best friend. Well, it can be your best friend or it can be your enemy. Just depends on your financial status. But he accelerated, the mega corporations that we know today. Okay, by the 1890s, Morgan was in control of many of the country's railroads, so therefore that made him, a good friend of people like Rockefeller or whoever, that was wanting to ship their product around the United States. Okay, so he's making bukus of money, okay, off of investing into other companies and trying to set up deals. But the biggest deal that he set up was in 1901. Whenever Andrew Carnegie, he's in his 60s at this point, he's ready to walk away and kind of take a step back, okay, and he sells his shares to J.P. Morgan to form the United States Steel Corporation, which was the first time in the world we had a $1 billion corporation. Okay, so J.P. Morgan, very important. Next, I was telling you about this earlier. Cornelius Vanderbilt, he was nicknamed the Commodore, made his early shipping on boats. Early fortune on boats used for shipping in and out of harbors. Okay, was based out of the Northeast, in fact. Okay, later he realized that he could expand his operation, and he invested in many railroads, especially in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. So he makes out like a bandit. Okay, and so because railroads, are used to transport everything everywhere. So at his death, okay, more than $200 billion in today's money is what he was worth. And what did he donate a large portion of that money to? He donated it to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Which, funny thing about this actually is Vanderbilt had never been to Nashville, but yet he created a whole university in Nashville that still bears his name to this day. Okay. Other important people, Frederick Taylor. Okay, he was not a wealthy industrialist, but he was somebody who helped the wealthy industrialists. Okay, with his concept of Taylorism, which was looking at factories and basically following the scientific method. Okay, collecting data, forming a hypothesis, all that stuff. And the idea was to make factory operations as efficient as humanly possible and eliminate any potential waste of time. Okay, so before, factories was kind of haphazard. Okay, they were designed in a really unorganized way. People pretty much just showed up and worked, and that was that. But now, Frederick Taylor comes up with the idea of it kind of seems elementary to us today, but it was revolutionary at the time. Okay, instead of just workers, everybody working on, let's say, one car, for instance, all 10 people working on one car, you assign every person a task to do in completing that car. instead of everybody standing around working on one thing. Again, seems kind of elementary to us now, but at the time, absolutely revolutionary. And what many people saw that employed Taylor strategies was they saved time, they produced more goods, and ultimately also worker happiness was a little bit better. Okay, because they kind of felt a little bit of a relief knowing that okay, I only have to do this one thing versus this massive task. Okay, but there were also some drawbacks to Taylorism that some workers did not like. Now, moving on. So Henry Ford, we all know Henry Ford. Okay, he did not create the automobile, but he perfected it with his Ford T model. Okay, and Henry Ford did not invent the assembly line, but he invented the moving assembly line that really accelerated the process of producing cars. And so whenever he did this, okay, especially in the aftermath of World War One, is whenever we really see the production of Ford cars take off into the 1920s. Many American families are able to purchase a car. Now, Ford paid higher than most employers in his time period, especially in the 1920s. What might have been Ford's motivations in doing that, in paying his workers a higher wage? Okay. First off, it's known as welfare capitalism, okay, where in order to avoid strikes, you pay your workers a little bit more. That was part of it. The other thing was that Ford honestly had an ingenious idea. I'm going to pay my workers more. They think they're getting a lot more. They're happy. They're going to stay. Again, welfare capitalism. But also, they just might turn around and take part of that paycheck they just made and put it toward a car. And so Ford, in a way, kind of a roundabout logic way, was getting his money back. Okay, he was getting his money back. Now, okay, so now you are going to answer the questions that are on over these sources. So you have source one, Senator Leland Stanford and job creation, and then source two, Andrew Carnegie, the Gospel of Wealth. So if you go to your Google Doc, okay, it says source one, and there's 3 questions. I've put these 3 questions into the Ed puzzle, okay, just really quick, and you're going to answer them in order, okay? You have the digital copy to help you out. And then you go to the video, the Ed puzzle will go to source 2 whenever I change slides, and there will be 3 questions over that as well, okay? It should work, but if worst case, for some reason, it does not, then I need you to copy and paste these questions, answer them, and send them in an email to me. Okay. Now, I can do that because there's only 9 of y'all, and that isn't too bad. So read over source 1, okay, and then answer the questions. There should be 3 questions that pop up. Okay. Hopefully that went by swimmingly. Next, source 2. Okay, this is by the way, forgot to say, source 1, the guy who wrote source 1, his name was Leland Stanford. He was a senator. He actually made enough money to start out in California, Stanford University. So pretty big deal. Now, Andrew Carnegie, okay, the Gospel of Wealth. Okay, so that's what I was telling you about earlier. About Carnegie saying that the income gap and wealthy people having money. This is his explanation on why that's beneficial to society. Okay, so look through that and then answer the questions as they pop up. Okay, moving on. I'm gonna build this in because you've done a lot of reading and writing. I'm gonna build this in as a natural break. Okay, so look at TikTok. Okay, go and get you a snack. Just get up and go to the restroom. Just again, like we were in class. Okay, if you're fine, then keep moving. But first, I need you to type in. Are there any questions that you may have so far? If you have any questions, type it in right now. Now, the next thing, okay, the Gilded Age. Like I said, that was a term coined by Mark Twain, the famous American author. Now, gilded means thinly covered with a gold layering of paint. Now, this time in the United States, I want you to think, before I tell you the definition, Why did Mark Twain describe this as the Gilded Age? This time in American society where you had these big factories, producing goods at a high rate, all that jazz. Why might he call it the Gilded Age? So answer that, and then we'll go over it. He called it the Gilded Age because on the surface everything was perfect, right? Shiny gold, goods were becoming cheaper. Donations by people like Carnegie were running high. Jobs were being created. Overall, new technology was being produced. Okay, all of these things, but underneath that seemingly awesome layer of prosperity was all of society's problems, and there were a lot during the so-called Gilded Age or the time of industrialization in the United States. So the second half of this ed puzzle is going to be focused on those problems. Okay, so let's go over this. Kind of gives you a snapshot of some of the problems. Okay, monopolies had become a major issue in the United States, like John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, why are monopolies a problem, and why are monopolies illegal today? Why is that an issue? And it's because you can charge whatever the heck you want. Okay, monopolies in the grand scheme of things are not good for consumers or us. Okay, other thing is business owners could bribe judges when the workers complained about poor conditions. Many government officials were even in with the wealthy factory owners. They might have been in for profits or something, but they were not going to pass legislation, even if it was for the benefits of the workers, if it meant a decrease in profits. Okay, and that was reflective. Okay, that disdain and disregard was kind of reflected by this statistic right here. In the 20-year span from 1881 to 1900, 35,000 workers a year die on the job. Okay, and just to kind of drive this point home, let's just say easy math. Trigg County's 17,000 people. I mean, it's probably a little less than that, but let's just say imagine 2 Trigg counties worth of people dying every year because there's no safety regulations. Okay, they're non-existent. Okay, there's no government agency. There's no OSHA. Okay, there's nothing like this at this time. In fact, OSHA did not come along until the 1970s. True story. Okay, and also minimum wage. People, complain about minimum wage. That's something that is being discussed. Like, does the minimum wage need to be raised, or would that just cause inflation? That's something for our policymakers to discuss. There were no laws at all on minimum wage. So, 725 with now, may seem a little low, but at the same time, at this point, it was worse because there was not a single law about a minimum wage or a maximum hour, including another issue was child labor. Okay, so a lot of problems in American society at this point. Now, this is one of my favorite cartoons. Okay, political cartoons. I want you to really take a minute and look at this. Okay, look at this and tell me, type in some of the things that you notice about this picture. Okay, now let's go through the details. Look, entrance from monopolists. Okay, which this is showing the United States Congress. Okay, this it's called Bosses of the Senate. Okay, the title of the cartoon is called The Boss of the Senate. So this is the Senate chamber. So you have the interest for monopolists and kind of this overhead viewing gallery. Look, Steel Beam Trust, Copper Trust, Standard Oil Trust, and this represents the senators down here at their desk. Okay, what is the message of this political cartoon, or what does this show you about power and prestige during the Gilded Age in the United States? What is this showing? Based on this picture, it looks like these guys are the ones running the show, right? These are big dudes, okay? And it represents the amount of money that they have had. I mean, you look at this guy, you'd have to get about 10 of these guys to fit into that guy. Like, the businesses hold and maintain the power, even over congressmen at this point. Because why? What do they have the power to do with politicians or judges or whoever? Bribery. Power of the dollar speaks very strongly, and in this case, the government is being corrupted by these bosses of the Senate, these big businessmen. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the responses to poor working conditions. What can you do if you hate your job and you want to improve better working conditions? You can go on strike. You can go on strike. So we're going to talk about some strikes in industrial America now. Okay. Sorry, I tried to build up a little bit of excitement like we would if we were in class because I know about 2/3 of the way in, y'all have kind of mentally checked out. Do not check out. Focus. We're almost done. Okay. Now, so the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, okay? This is significant. This is kind of like a, oh crap, hit the fan kind of moment. Because this is the first time in United States history that we see a large collection of workers get together and form a coalition and rise up against an industry. And it was the first time in United States history that we had a nationwide labor problem. Okay. So the Panic of 1873, okay, that's still going on, by the way. This was not really resolved until 1879. Okay, they call it the Panic of 1873. Okay, we all remember saying about that. With Grant, President Grant, he withdrew the greenbacks, the paper bills from circulation that caused a massive financial panic. So the railroads are having to slash or cut their workers' pay. Okay, but in 1877, workers in West Virginia, this little tiny town in West Virginia called Martinsburg, just decided to walk off. And it led to other railroads shutting down and other strikes across the country. Now, why is it so problematic if the railroads are shut down? Okay, why is that such an issue? Okay, answer that. And it's because literally at this point, there is no cars, there is no airplanes. The entire infrastructure of the country is dependent on these railroads working and running as they normally do. Okay, and this railroad strike goes on for weeks. Okay, and we're talking millions and millions of dollars of property damage. Okay, finally, President Hayes, which first off, a little side note, how had President Hayes became the president? I want to see if you guys remember this. How had he became the president after the election of 1876? So what was the controversy with that election? So put that right. There was all that issue with the southern states. There was electoral fraud in those states, and the whole compromise was okay. We'll let Hayes be president. Southern states are going to be called for the Southern Redeemer Democrats. Okay, and also the federal troops had to leave the South. But anyway, sorry, a little side note there. So the Homestead Strike in 1892. Okay, so Homestead Steel Works was owned. It was a Carnegie-owned plant, and for years, okay, there had been a labor union of steelworkers at Homestead. They'd gotten along with the management, including Carnegie. Carnegie had really not worried about it, but then this guy comes along, Henry Clay Frick, and some could say he was a bit of a prick. Okay, if that helps you remember it. But the thing that happened was this. Okay, they're trying to negotiate for better wages. Even the plant, like the union manager, is like, listen, like our men are not making enough money. Like we need more money. And so the negotiations between Frick and the steel union totally break down. They totally break down. And Frick even locks the workers out. If they were a part of the union, they were not allowed to come into work. It was nicknamed Fort Frick because they put 12-foot high barbell wire fences all around the plant and even put guards up on it. They were not allowed to come in if they were part of the union. And he wants the union to fold because at this point, even Carnegie, who had come from poverty and all that, the wealthy industrialists are tired of dealing with unions. Okay, such as because this is the aftermath we're going to get to in a second. The Knights of Labor are starting to disband after Haymarket Square, all these things. Okay, so early July, Frick decides to bring in these people from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Okay, that's why they're known as the Pinkertons, but they were armed. Okay, they were not like detectives there to investigate a crime. Their main goal was to prevent the workers from entering. And so the Pinkertons come roll up to the plant on the morning of July 6th, and when they get there, there is thousands of strikers there waiting for them. And gunfire ultimately ensues, and ultimately the strikers drive the Pinkertons away. Several people are killed and wounded in this aftermath. So it's a temporary win for the strikers. They get control of the plant, they get the Pinkertons away. But then the Pennsylvania governor gets involved the next week. and dispatches the National Guard. They go into town and they forcibly reopen the plant. Which you may be like, oh, that's what the strikers wanted. No, not like this it would. Okay, because guess what? Now they have to play by Henry Clay Frick's rules. And it also doesn't help the workers who come back after the strike is over that somebody made an assassination attempt on Frick's life. Okay, so eventually, months later, because the tide of the nation kind of turns against them. Okay, the strikers, okay, kind of sympathizes more with Carnegie of all people because of the violence that ensued. So the workers eventually had to accept major cuts in their pay. The union is effectively disbanded. Only about a fifth of the workers who had worked at Homestead get their jobs back, and those that do have to work a 12-hour shift, with no breaks. Okay. Now, some people did criticize Carnegie for this because they said that this whole mess could have been avoided because when the workers went on strike at Homestead early in, like May and June, Carnegie he went frolicking over in Scotland. He kind of evaded the situation. And a lot of people who were critical of Carnegie in the situation said one word from Scotland could have saved this entire situation and bloodshed could have been avoided. But blood was spilled. Ultimately, the workers did not get what they wanted. And this is just one instance of violence between workers and management during this time. The other, okay, not as violent, not a lot of bloodshed here, but the Pullman strike was very significant. Okay, it was very similar to the Great Railway Strike. So George Pullman, okay, designed sleeping railroad cars, which you got to think the time period. It's 1894. Okay, sleeping railroad cars were very, very important because that's the way most people travel. Okay, but Pullman made bukus of money off this, and so he decides to build a company town just outside of Chicago called Pullman, Illinois. And at one point, 12,000. He had 12,000 workers for him, and all his workers had to live in his company town. Now, what were Pullman's motivations in doing this? Think about it. Why would he want all his workers to live in his town? Because that was the one thing he had to do. If you worked for Pullman, you had to live in his company town. It was not optional. So why did he do that? Multiple reasons why he did that. A, they're living in his town, so he can charge them rent. Two, he gets to keep an eye on them. Okay, he knows where all of them are at, and so he can prevent them from doing things that he may not want his workers doing. Okay, but still a little bit much of a control freak. And then three, he gets to prevent union representatives from entering his town, and therefore it'll make it very hard for his workers to join a union. Ultimately, the Supreme Court eventually ruled a few years later that this was kind of unconstitutional to force your workers to live in a town and charge them rent. Okay, but for the time being, the Supreme Court has not ruled on it. So Pullman decides to cut back the wages, the amount of money he's paying his workers, but he also does not reduce the rent or price in the company store. So think about this. Their expenses have not changed. They have the exact same expenses, but they're making way less money. That's mathematically, that does not make sense. And the workers see that. They decide to go on strike, and then it affects the whole nation because Pullman cars are prevalent all over the country. Okay. Now, Eugene V. Debs, okay, and the National Railroad Union, they get involved in this. So Debs initially tells the workers, like, listen, we don't want any violence, we don't want another Homestead, okay? But the workers end up going on strike. Now, it's not as much chaos as it was at Homestead, but it was still a pretty big deal because he's in charge of the railway union, Debs is, and he finally decides to support the Pullman workers when the strike is when they know it's going to happen, whenever they know it cannot be stopped. Okay, and so the railroad union stopped moving trains that had any of Pullman's cars on it. Now, again, most of the cars in the country had a Pullman car on it. So why is that so significant? Well, again, all trade and everything goes through trains at this day and age in United States history. And so Chicago is running low on everything. The people of Chicago are basically starving. There's no milk. There's no food, other types of food. There's nothing. And there's also another reason why Chicago is important. For years, okay, when the Great Plains had cattle roaming and you had ranchers on the Great Plains and all this, they would herd their cattle north to Dodge City, Kansas, and other places like that, throw the cows on a train, and they ship them off to Chicago to be slaughtered. Chicago was known as like a big slaughterhouse town. In its early years, Cincinnati, Ohio, around here, was also known for that. Okay, so not only is this railway strike just affecting Chicago, it's affecting the entire country. Okay, because Chicago is a major hub, but also it's a place where most of the country's meat is processed. Okay, so eventually President Grover Cleveland decides to get involved, and he sends the National Guard. They get the trains up running again. Now, part of the reason why Cleveland felt justification to send uh, the Guard in is because United States mail was on the trains that had been stopped. Okay, but also the people of Chicago are starving at this point, and everything ended up okay, but still, very chaotic time for sure. Now, we're almost done. I'll show you how much we have left. For those, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So not too bad. Okay, the Knights of Labor. So there are two major labor organizations you need to know. One is the Knights of Labor, created in 1869. So right when the United States is on the cusp of really industrializing. And at the time, they were somewhat seen as a radical organization in some aspects. So they push for equal pay for men and women. You got to think, okay, we're 50 years out from the passage of the 19th Amendment. Okay, and so that's a kind of radical idea at this time. Okay, in fact, the Equal Pay Act was not passed by Congress until 1963. But the Knights of Labor are pushing for it. The workers owned stock into the factories where they worked. They thought that should be a right. But also the Knights of Labor, and this is going to be important later, they welcomed any type of worker as long as they were not a doctor or a lawyer or kind of your uppercut people. If you had worked a labor job at any point in your life, you were part of the union, buckaroo. It was awesome. It was kind of like a come as you are kind of vibe. Anybody and everybody is welcome unless you're a doctor, a lawyer, or a Chinese person. Yeah, because there was some xenophobia going on already at this time. But overall, they accepted everybody. And it was one big happy union. Isn't that nice? This is going to be a problem later. Okay. And that one of those problems was the Haymarket Square riot. So, Haymarket Square, this area in Chicago, okay, hundreds of people had met at this rally. Okay, some of the Knights of Labor were involved in this rally. And they were pushing for an 8-hour workday, but they were also responding to the day before there had been picketing workers at a Reaper plant in Chicago that had been killed by strikebreakers. And the police had gotten involved, and violence had ensued, and 2 people had been killed. Okay, so the rally goes okay for the most part, but at the end, the police show up and they try to get everybody to go home. Somebody in the crowd throws a bomb at the police, and multiple people are killed because obviously a gunfight ensues and all of that. We are still not for sure today who threw the bomb, but what we do know is that 7 people were charged for it, 7 anarchists or people who went to overthrow the government who had anarchist beliefs, and 4 were actually convicted and hung for this. One was actually released, and then 2 had to serve life sentences. But anyway, okay, martial law gets issued in Chicago the next day because a bomb has been thrown at the police. Many think this is the first terroristic attack in the history of the United States. Okay, and the effect of this event, the Knights of Labor doesn't just go poof overnight, but it leads to the steady decline of this organization. Because the Knights of Labor were involved in this rally, they start to be associated with being a bunch of radical anarchists who want to overthrow the government. So therefore, that's going to be a hard sell for new members. Oh, you want to be a Knights of Labor? We have this major scandal going on. But other than that, it's a good time. No. So what happened with the Knights of Labor was enter the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, not NFL, AFL. Okay. So they kind of picked up the broken pieces of the Knights of Labor after the Haymarket Square riot, and they create a new labor union, excuse me. Okay, and they were dedicated, kind of like the Knights, to higher wages, shorter hours, all that stuff. But they stayed out of certain issues that the Knights had pushed for. But the biggest thing, okay, was the Knights of Labor accepted any type of worker just about. The AFL focused on skilled laborers who had a specific skill. Okay. And each of those workers were represented by their own craft union. Okay. So instead of it being like we're all in this together, High School Musical kind of vibe, everybody's in the same union. It's like A craft union could be part of the AFL, but they still have some autonomy and ability to make their own decisions. And that was much more appealing to a lot of people than the Knights. Okay. So on the next slide, I'm going to ask you what the main difference between the Knights and the AFL was, which easy way to remember this. Okay. The AFL, it's divided up into different craft unions. So it's not one big union. So there's one for welders, plumbers, whatever. Okay. Now, back to this. Okay, sorry, I accidentally skipped over this. Why is it significant that they focus on skilled workers? Okay, skilled workers. How does that give them more leverage? How does this give the unions, craft unions, a little bit more leverage when push comes to shove and they're negotiating with these factory owners? Think about that for a second. Now, if somebody has a certain skill that not everybody has, it obviously gives them a leg up over unskilled workers. It's kind of like, okay, let's say I worked at Walmart. Okay, true story. Princeton Walmart, OGP, fun time. But anyway, okay, if everybody at Walmart walked out one day, like yes, that would be a problem. Okay, they would have to find a lot of people short notice. Okay, no company wants that to happen. Okay, that would be a problem. But imagine if the entire staff of Trigg County Hospital walked out. Would they be able to replace that labor shortage as quickly? And the answer is no. Okay, I mean, you can't just walk up to people on the street and be like, "Oh, do you want to be a nurse or you want to be a doctor today?" Nursing school and medical school is one of the toughest things. And I know some of you may be thinking about it. I say go for it, but it will be a lot of your time. But the point is, when people have a skill, they're not as easily replaced. And so by focusing on skilled laborers, the AFL had more leverage than their Knights of Labor counterparts. And by allowing them to form their own unions within the AFL, which think about it like this, okay? All of these conferences, which those of you know me know I'm a big college sports fan, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, the Pac 12, they're all their own conference, which even though the Pac 12 is almost obsolete, stupid Big 10 and ACC ripping them away. But anyway, okay, these are all part of the NCAA, okay, but they're still their own entity, right? The SEC is much more different than the Big 10 over here, which make sure you tell Coach Strock this. SEC has way more national titles in college football. But anyway, they're different conferences, but they're all a part of the NCAA. The AFL, similar setup. All these different unions were part of the AFL, but they still, again, have their own autonomy and ability to make decisions. So what was the main difference between the Knights of Labor and the AFL? Put that down. And then your last thing for today, just a simple response to this little mini prompt. Industrialization in the United States brought forth positive change for the entire country. Okay, I want you to answer that like 2-3 sentences. You do that, and you are done. Okay. If you have any questions, please let me know. Your only homework for this weekend. So if you went ahead and knocked this out on Thursday, which actually never mind, because we have to do that other thing in class. So tell you what, once you finish this, no homework for the rest of your weekend. If y'all need anything, please let me know and have a great rest of your day. See y'all.